It's time for a bike break. Thanks for joining us today. Bike Break is brought to you by Smart Trips, the Community Cycling Center, Portland Bureau of Transportation, and it's made possible with support from Metro and the Federal Transportation Administration. And the event is part of Sunday Parkways Live, sponsored by Kaiser Permanente. And excuse me, I have not introduced myself. I'm Timo with Portland Bureau of Transportation, and this is Matt.
Hello, I am the volunteer and event manager at the Community Cycling Center.
Let's talk about how do you get ready and set to roll. First thing is, let's talk about how's your bike. This is especially for those of you who've been leaving a bike off in a corner, in the garage. Matt, you might see a bike like that once in a while at the shop. What kind of issues do people maybe bring when they bring a bike out of the garage for the first time?
Yeah, I think the thing I see the most is a lot of times they're really dusty and there may be spiders and bugs all over it. So I think before you even bring it into a shop, maybe if you want to wipe it down, get all the nasty things off it that have been on it in the garage for a while. But I think a couple of other things are, people come into the shop, they'll drive their bike because it's not quite ready to ride yet. And a lot of times the wheels aren't on, or the handlebars are twisted, or the seat's pointing the wrong way. And a lot of times, I think the most common thing is not having air in the tires. The tubes can hold air for a really long time, but over time they do lose the air. So if you haven't been riding for a couple of months, it's probably a good thing to pump them up or at least check the air before you take them for a spin.
Well, it sounds like some of those things might be obvious, like if the saddle was on crosswise, maybe you want to get that straightened up. But things like the tires might be something that someone wouldn't notice automatically, because if you haven't been riding for a while, or if you haven't ridden regularly for a while, you may just not know what is a tire supposed to feel like. What is a good inflation? There is a little handy reminder for how to get your bike ready for every ride. It's called the ABC Quick Check, and each of those stands for something. A is air, like in your tires. B is for your brakes, making sure they'll stop you. And C is for the chain. And we have a video from the CCC's Virtual Bike Club.
Hey everyone, now we're going to do our ABC Q check. You'd want to do this every time you ride just to make sure that your bike is safe and ready to roll. A stands for air, so the first thing we'll check is the air in our tires. I'm going to do this by squeezing my tire here and make sure that it's nice and firm. If it feels squishy, then we probably want to put a little bit more air in it. If it's flat, then we probably want to fix the flat. Next thing I want to check is my brakes. I have a rear brake and I have a front brake on this bike. Does yours have two brakes or does it just have one? To check the front brake, I'm going to squeeze my left lever and try to roll my bike forward. If it doesn't roll forward, that means my brake is working really nicely. Next, I'm going to check my rear brake. And squeeze my right brake lever and roll backwards. If my bike doesn't want to roll backwards, that means my right brake is working really nicely. Next thing to check is our C, our chain. The chain lives right here. The way we check our chain is by pedaling backwards with our bike on the ground. If I pedal backwards and it feels really smooth and nice, that means that my chain's ready to go. If I pedal backwards and it's chunky or it doesn't want to pedal backwards, that means I might want to look into what is going on with my chain before I hop on my bike. Last but not least, very important, I want to check my quick releases, the Q's in our ABC Q check. The quick release was right here and right here. These keep our wheels on tight. If our levers are open or loose, that means that our wheel might fall out while we're riding. So you want to check to make sure that your lever is closed and very tight. And then other than that, we just want to make sure that there's nothing that's, probably check that out before we ride.
The parts that you notice when you're doing a quick check that
To make sure that my fenders aren't rubbing anywhere, because I feel like that is very annoying. Or if there's nothing in between the tire and the fender.
do you spin the wheel to hear if it's going to make a noise?
Yeah, a lot of times it's a leaf, and that is annoying to me sometimes.
Uh-huh.
So I got to catch it before I start riding.
I hear that. So the first thing Madeline talked about was air. And I've come up with a little quick tune your bike up. I call it the 5-minute tune up to make sure that if you do the ABC Quick Check and something is off, then you can correct that quickly and move on. It's something you can do regularly, once a month maybe. It doesn't take the place of a full tune-up if you've been riding your bike for miles and miles and miles, and it's really, starting to seem crunchy. But it will keep things moving pretty smoothly and save some money in the long run, because components, well, what are components like?
They tend to wear out, so when you don't clean your chain, the road, dirt and grime and grease kind of become like little sandpapers on the gears in the chain, and eventually, if you don't clean it as often, you'll have to replace them more often, and that is money you probably don't want to spend if you can avoid it.
Exactly so. So first thing to talk about was air. So generally, I always, as she said, you can give it a feel. I like to also use a tire pump with a gauge. And if you don't have one, just stop by your local bike shop, ask them, can I just check my tires with a pump with a gauge? You'll see on the sidewall of the tire a recommended inflation. And what kind of advice do you give to people about their inflation?
Usually I always stay within the recommended inflation, and if there's just a max, I usually go about like 10 PSI under. It usually results in a more comfortable ride for me, but I think it kind of depends for each person.
Different bikes have different tires. This bike has kind of medium-sized tires. Some racing bikes have really skinny tires, and they take a very high inflation. They might be like 120 pounds per square inch, or PSI. And that's going to be really hard. And the idea is that the harder the tire is, the less resistance, because you're making it have a really small, what we call a contact patch, where the rubber meets the road. It's a small amount, so small friction. Other bikes, like your cruiser bike, might have a big balloon tire where it's really big and round. And that's designed because the more balloony it is, the more cushiony it is. So a racing bike is going to go fast, but it's going to feel really bumpy when you go over jittery pavement. Balloon tire bike is going to go slower, but it's going to feel cushy. And no matter what kind of bike you have, you can adjust the inflation. As Matt says, don't go beyond the maximum. And oftentimes there'll be a minimum as well. Don't go below that. But try checking it somewhere, towards the maximum, maybe. Give it a ride. If it seems too bumpy, let it out a little bit, so it's a little more cushy. It seems too slow, pump it up a little bit. But find your comfortable inflation, and then make sure that you pump it up to that inflation, once a week, once every couple of weeks, if you're riding a fair amount. But what would happen if your brakes were, let me see if I can simulate this. Like if your brakes are moving, the brake lever is going so close to the handlebar. Let's see if you can see that brake lever if I stand behind it. The brake lever is here, and as I pull it in, it's getting pretty close to the handlebar. In fact, almost touching it if I pull it really hard. What is that telling me, Matt?
It seems like your brake pads are a little bit further from the bike, and you probably have a little bit of loose cable. So you want to do, if your bike has a barrel adjuster, you can turn it so the cable is a little bit tighter and not as slack.
And oftentimes on some bikes, the barrel adjuster might be up at the top, right by the brake lever, especially on a mountain bike style lever. In fact, you can kind of see on this bike, it's got two brake levers actually, this one and this one. And if I use this barrel adjuster, not sure how much you can see in there, but there is a little barrel there that you can turn. Like Matt says, that will help tighten it up, and that might do all that you need. If that doesn't work for you, that might be time to talk to your shop. Think about new brake pads, maybe new cable. But for your 5-minute tune-up, you're just going to try that barrel adjuster. Hopefully that works. The other thing you can do, especially in the wintertime, is actually clean off the surface of your brake pads. Because like Matt said, grit, grime, friction, rubs down the wheels, not so great. If you have disc brakes, don't worry about that part. Or coaster brake, also don't worry about it. Then the last part, I'm going to have to adjust our camera, is the chain. And as Madeline pointed out, when she rolled her chain backwards, it sounded nice and smooth. But that might not be what happens when you roll your chain back. It might sound like cruncha, cruncha, cruncha. So one thing you can do is get out your rag, my dirty rag. I have a clean rag that I use to wipe off the brakes because I don't want any grease on those. But the dirty rag is going to be okay getting grease. In fact, I'm just going to take it and rub my chain over it, or roll my chain through it, is what I really mean, just to take off the surface dirt. And take my chain lube, and this is a specific thing for chains. You want to get this from your bike shop. Don't use WD-40 or what else do people sometimes use?
I saw somebody use Crisco one time.
You know, it could be a good emergency thing, but on a regular basis, I wouldn't recommend it. But there are several kinds that are made specifically for bikes, and then I just find usually there's what's called a magic link. I'm going to call it a magic link. It's just a different looking link, and I'm just using it as a place to start and figure out. Okay, I'm going to start dropping lube on there, and I'm just going to drop lube on every link of the chain. Maybe not even very carefully, just like drop, 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 work the chain all the way around until it gets back to that one link. So I can see every link of the chain has been oiled. I'm going to run it through like that. I might skip my chain. And basically just to work the oil into the chain. And then I'm just going to rub it off one more time with the rag. Basic idea. I want the oil in between the links, not on the outside, because on the outside, it's going to attract more of that grit, dirt, sand. But on the inside is where the chain links are moving together, and that's where you want it to be nice and smooth. If that still doesn't smooth things out, what other kinds of things might a chain be complaining about?
I think sometimes too is just checking that your chain is on any of the rings. And what you could do is if you lift up your back wheel and you pedal forward, sometimes you just have it in a different gear than the chain should be on. And then once you spin it, it might just kind of fix itself.
I could hear that my chain fell onto a different gear than I was expecting when I did that little lubrication.
Perfect, yeah, just like that. So when you're pedaling backwards, it kind of made a noise, but now once you pedal forwards, it goes to the gear it's supposed to be on, and hopefully that noise goes away.
Occasionally, especially if the bike has been left out in the rain or something, you might see some stuck links.
Yes, there might be rust, and sometimes if you look at the chain that's not bending correctly and it's kind of like stuck in the spot, that may be time to go to the bike shop and pick up a new chain. So try using the oil first. Something might just be, a little bit creaky because it's been sitting out too much. If the oil doesn't work, ask your friendly local bike shop and see if they can recommend a new chain or something else to make that happier. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.